So today we're going to talk about the Clone Wars, specifically something I've always really wondered about and has always seemed odd to me. And I've had this ever since I first watched the movies in the movie Attack of the Clones in theaters. And that is how the Republic stood anything close to a chance against the Separatists. It just didn't really make much sense to me. Because in Attack of the Clones, we're told that there's only 200,000 clones. I think the source material contradicts each other, but some people have said that the Republic didn't institute a draft or form a large non-clone army, and the Confederacy fielded trillions, if not quadrillions, of battle droids. And it doesn't make any sense. And people can say, well, the Confederacy was being controlled by Sidious and Tyrannus, and they were deliberately sabotaging the war effort. And I guess there's an argument that could be made about that, but that just seems kind of like lame writing. It just seems weird that so few people within universe would be like, this war doesn't make any sense. Why haven't the separatists just overwhelmed us? Like, basic logic suggests let's just do a little bit of math here. Now, I don't know how many zeros are in a quadrillion, but let's do 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. I think that's how you write a trillion. And then we're going to divide that by 200,000. So 5 million. So at the very least, each clone would have to kill 5 million battle droids to have things on equal standing. It doesn't make any sense. And people can say the clones are superior to the battle droids or whatever, but past a certain point it doesn't matter. You got to wonder how long would they have to, if all the droids just stood there in a line and they had a rifle, how long would it take them to gun down 5 million battle droids? It doesn't make any sense. There's no way the Republic could have only had 200,000 guys. I know they said there's a million more on the way, but that doesn't really help matters. That just reduces it to, I don't know, 1 million droids per clone. So I don't really see how that helps matters. I also don't know if the trillion battle droids includes droid starfighters, or if that's just B1, or maybe just B1 or B2. What about all the automated ships they have? And they don't just have battle droids, they have tanks, they have Hailfire drones, like I said, they have gunships, they have all these other things. We're supposed to believe that a clone could take out every clone can take out 100 tanks plus without dying. That every Republic starfighter pilot can take out 10,000 droid fighters. That's just not possible. It doesn't make any sense. It can't be the case. So rather than just resorting to going, Sidious just sabotaged it, which I get because that's technically the canon answer, but it's lame. It's really lame. Here's some ideas I came up with. Okay, the most obvious one is that the 200,000 number is misleading. That 200,000 units meant 1,000 each. So instead of 200,000 units, it's 20 million units or whatever that would be. Or that'd be 200 million. I don't know. It would be a lot more, or maybe that was just on that one city, but they were being grown all over Camino, so they had way more than that. But then again, how much does that even matter? Okay, so let's go back to this. Let's say there's 20 million clones. That they're units of whatever, 1,000. Or we'll make it easier. We'll say 200 million clones. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, divided by... Okay, so then it's only, I guess, 5,000 battle droids per... it's not possible. And that would be if all of them were frontline fighters. What about the people who are piloting the ships? Let me see what a Venator it takes to crew a Venator. Okay, a Venator has a crew of 7,400. So if we were to take the canon number of 200,000, they could crew approximately 27 ships. So, like, this obviously isn't the case. It doesn't make any sense. So, even if they had more clones, I don't really think it would make that much of a difference. So, then how was the Republic able to fight this? So, first thing you have to understand is that most systems in Star Wars have their own defense fleets. In particular, I think Kuat and Corellia even had dreadnoughts. They had like I think Kuat had like three or four Mandiator, one or two dreadnoughts. They had battleships. They had all kinds of stuff. Mon Calamari obviously has its own fleet. Kuat Drive Yards, the biggest capital ship manufacturer in Star Wars, would frequently make capital ships for planetary defense force or sector defense forces. Not all members of the Republic are just one planet. A lot of them will be bigger states. They might have like a dozen worlds or something. So they can afford to build a decent sized capital ship fleet. Also, I assume pretty much all planets would have some sort of a military, even if it's just for security and policing purposes and to deal with pirates and that kind of thing. So all these pre-existed. So I'd imagine once total war was declared, Palpatine, or they either Palpatine conscripted or the various parties willingly offered their forces into the Grand Army of the Republic. So you'd have maybe tens of thousands of systems that would donate their ships and their armed forces, at least a substantial portion of them, to the Central War effort. And who knows how much that could be. There's the number of planets in the Star Wars galaxy is kind of confusing, but even if you had like I don't know, like 100,000 planets, and each planet gave on average like 1,000 guys, that's still like 10 million or whatever. So folding the local defense fleets into the Grand Army of the Republic would make up a lot of it. Second, they had a draft. I don't care what the canon says. I don't care what George Lucas says. I don't care what any of them say. They had to have a draft. They had to have some sort of conscription if they were going to get anywhere in this whole disaster zone of a war. Maybe it was restricted to certain planets, but I don't see how they could fill the crews of that many ships and just field that many soldiers without having to resort to conscription. I mean, maybe their population's so big that they had like a volunteer army and they were able to just raise enough recruits. I mean, that's entirely possible. The Republic contained most of the galaxy's population. Most of the separatist planets were not very big or well populated. So even if they just had a volunteer army, they probably would have been able to raise millions, if not billions, of soldiers. I'm sure lots of people would want to fight for the Republic. Maybe it was left up to a system level. I could imagine a lot of the more loyalist worlds would institute some sort of a draft, or people would just be more likely to join. So once you start to get to that, you can see the Republic will start to be able to field an army in the hundreds of millions or billions. And then it gets a bit more reasonable once we start to look at the kind of the meta picture. There's still a lot of other issues, though, that we should address. So, secondly, my theory is that the Republic generally had much greater shipbuilding capacity, even if the Confederacy was able to turn out droids at the rate they were. I think most of the galaxy's major shipyards stayed in Republic space. So let's see, Yaga Minor stayed Republic. Where's Kuat? Kuat stayed Republic. Iriadu did. There you go. Iriadu did. Where are the other big ones? I think Bothawi has it. Mon Calamari stayed pro-Republic. I think the only major planet I can think of that has shipyards, Fondor joined the Separatists, but I think they were largely like dragged their heels and didn't really do much. So most of the galaxy's shipbuilding, like big capital shipbuilding capacity, I'd imagine stayed in Republic hands. I mean, the Confederacy was able to set up droid production all over the place because that was substantially simpler. But dealing with capital ships is something else entirely. So my theory is that the Republic probably either outnumbered them or at least outproduced them in terms of ships throughout the war. And that was kind of a main reason why the Confederacy wasn't able to use its numbers. They just simply didn't have a big enough fleet to transport that many droids, make sure they landed properly, and then support them once they were down on the surface. So I'd imagine just a lot of them got blown up in orbit, or they landed and then they just were kind of, their fleet got driven off. So I don't know if there's anything really within the lore about it, but that just kind of makes sense to me. So that seems plausible to me. Also, droids aren't particularly competent, so automation might have worked for building cheap B1 or B2 battle droids, but it might have been difficult for them to get the degree of automation able to put together something like a Providence class. That's kind of my theory on that account. I think also there is a general issue with coordination. I mean, if we look at this map, the Confederate territory was very spread out. And I mean, that can be a good thing because it meant the Republic had a really long front, but it also meant the Confederates probably had a lot of trouble coordinating between the various parts of their territory. So those are kind of some immediate thoughts. Going back to kind of the whole clone trooper thing, I think it is possible that it could refer to 200,000 because how most armies have historically worked, or most good armies have worked, is you will have a professional core of the army, and that will be supplemented by either conscripts or allies or something else during a war, particularly a total war. Even if you have an entirely volunteer army like the American army, they still have something a bit like this. Generally speaking, and this is something I've done some research into, and different people give different things, but generally speaking, what happens is it's the Marines' job to take ground, and it's the Army's job to hold it and to move in with the big guns. And we can see this in Star Wars and other places. Like, there's this idea that the stormtroopers are all that the Empire had. It's not true. Like, probably 99% of the Imperial Army was the Imperial Army, or the Imperial Army. There was Imperial Army soldiers. They wore, like, normal field armor and carried blaster rifles, and they weren't stormtroopers. They were their own branch. The stormtroopers are, I think, very analogous to Marines. They were the elite spearhead of the Empire who was tasked whenever there was something that required a lot of skill and firepower and something to be taken, they'd be sent in. Like at the Battle of Hoth, they just sent in stormtroopers, but the Imperial Army would garrison planets. They do artillery support. They do all kinds of other stuff. But like in the American Army, in a lot of cases, the Marines will go in and take the ground, and then the Army will come in afterwards. The Army will provide fire support and like armor support and that kind of thing. So what I'm saying is, it seems reasonable to me that, let's say the Republic had like 10 or 20 million clones. Even if the droid army was like a trillion, it's not as if the like 20 million clones is going to be facing all trillion of the droids at the same time. So what the Republic probably did was they would send legions to important battle worlds, like if Kuat's getting attacked or if they need to take Munalisk or something important, they'll send them in force there, and they'll be the spearhead. They'll be the Republic fleet. They'll be probably the people who mainly deal with the artillery and some of the tanks and provide fighter support and stuff. But the job of the clones is to go to these big important battles, win them, and then the conscripted or volunteer army probably will hold the position down. And their main job is to provide offensives. You also see this in Warhammer 40k, where the Imperial Guard's main duty is to just garrison and defend planets, Whereas when like you need something attacked, you generally bring in the Space Marines to go in and deal with it. The Ottoman Empire also functioned similarly with the Janissary Corps, as did the Roman Empire, where a lot of Roman armies was often made up of auxiliaries or allies. So finally, I just wanted to talk a bit about logistics. So on the surface, when you look at droids, you're like, oh, well, logistics of this must be really easy. They're easy to build, they're easy to repair, they're easy to transport, etc. Now, electricity in Star Wars doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's not something that's particularly well developed. I find it very confusing because there's like hypermatter reactors, but they also need plasma, and it's kind of like oil. I don't know. It's very kind of nebulous. So my theory is that the droids take an immense amount of energy just because you have to charge so many of them. And I really have no idea how long the battery pack on a B1 battle droid lasts. I mean, I'm sure there's an official number for it, but like just thinking realistically, they're going to have to be recharged on a regular basis. I mean, who knows if it's going to be like droid starfighters, I think, need to be recharged like every like half hour. If B1 battle droids have to be recharged even once a day, then that means like once a day they're going to have to like retreat and go back and get recharged, or they're going to have some super vulnerable vehicle that's a giant fuel cell to just go out and resupply them. That sounds like a nightmare. Um, that sounds really difficult. I mean, organic troops have their own issues too, but who knows? Food and water may very well be a lot easier to get than whatever the spare parts are you need for droids, plus all the electricity, that sort of thing. Rations may actually be more energy efficient compared to battery packs. That wouldn't really surprise me if a clone trooper could carry rations that would last them longer than a B1 battle droid could have battery charge for. And I mean, that is a very difficult situation, particularly when you have just a front line that looks like this. You have like border porn here, like border gore. This is horrible trying to maintain this front, especially if the Republic has a large advantage in the number of capital ships. Your numbers don't really mean anything because they can't effectively get them into combat. They can't get like a reasonable fraction of their 10 million or their trillion, their 10 trillion, their quadrillion battle droids into actual combat, nor can they like adequately use them within combat. They can't adequately really supply them or whatever, or provide air support for them. So those are kind of my thoughts on the matter. That while it may even be possible that the Confederacy did outnumber the Republic like 100 to 1,000 to 1, but just other factors in the war, like the probable logistics nightmare, the lack of coordination between the various factions, the poorly designed and overstretched supply lines, meant that the whole war was more or less a losing proposition, whether or not they were controlled by the Sith. So that's my attempt to explain this very complex and important. That's weird. This one shows Fondor as part of it. Okay, so Fondor didn't. I think it. Sorry. Yeah. Like I said, the lore behind this is very confused and inconsistent and incoherent. So this was just kind of my attempt to come up with something that I thought made sense. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something. Lots more content to come, and I'll talk to you guys later.